1981. A small conference room in Tokyo. Engineers place a strange silver box on the table. It doesn't take film. It doesn't use chemistry. It saves pictures onto a magnetic disc. People laugh. A camera that doesn't use film? Impossible. But Sony just quietly lit the spark of a revolution. Welcome to Alt Buzz Archives, where we uncover the forgotten stories of innovation that shaped our digital world. If you love tech history and camera culture, hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell. Because today we trace how Sony went from a bold experiment to an undisputed mirrorless king. And trust me, this journey is anything but ordinary. Decades before Instagram, before smartphones, before anyone had even heard the word digital photography, Sony built the world's first electronic still camera. And almost nobody noticed. Picture the 1970s. Photography meant one thing: film. Silver halide crystals suspended in gelatin. Light-sensitive chemistry that required darkness, precision, and patience. Every photographer on Earth depended on it. Kodak, Fuji, Agfa. They controlled the entire ecosystem. Film was photography. There was no alternative. The process itself was almost ritualistic. You loaded a roll of film into your camera in the dark. You carefully advanced it, listening for the click. You composed your shot, pressed the shutter, and hoped you got it right, because you wouldn't know until later, much later, after you finished the roll. After you took it to a lab, after someone else processed it in a dark room filled with chemicals. Photography was beautiful, but it was also slow, expensive, and unpredictable. But Sony wasn't satisfied. They were already experimenting with video technology, building televisions, developing magnetic recording systems. Their engineers were obsessed with electronics, with finding new ways to capture and store information. And somewhere in their research labs, an engineer asked a dangerous question. What if we could capture a still image electronically? What if film wasn't necessary at all? The question was heretical. The entire photography industry was built on film. Billions of dollars, millions of jobs, generations of expertise. Suggesting you could replace it with electronics was like suggesting you could replace a painter's canvas with a television screen. It seemed absurd, but Sony kept asking. The answer arrived in 1981, the Mavica, magnetic video camera. It looked like something from a science fiction film. Boxy, silver, strange. Instead of film, it used a small magnetic disc called a Mavica. Each disc could hold 50 frames. The resolution was tiny, roughly 570 by 490 pixels. You couldn't print large photos, you couldn't compete with film sharpness, but you could play the images directly on a television screen. Instantly, no darkroom, no chemicals, no waiting. Think about what that meant. For the first time in history, you could see your photograph immediately after taking it. Not hours later, not days later, immediately. You could delete bad shots, retake compositions, share images without printing them. The implications were staggering. The photography industry barely knew what to make of it. Canon stayed silent. Nikon ignored it. Trade magazines called it a curiosity. Film manufacturers dismissed it as a toy. Professional photographers scoffed. The resolution was too low. The storage was too limited. The image quality couldn't match film. They were right on every technical point, but they missed the larger truth. Sony had done something profound. They proved film was optional. They proved light could be captured, stored, and displayed without a single grain of silver halide. The concept alone was revolutionary. It didn't matter that the first version was imperfect. What mattered was the door it opened. Commercially, the Mavica prototype failed. It never became a mass-market product. The technology wasn't ready. Consumers weren't ready. The world wasn't ready. But Sony had done something far more important. They ignited a global race toward digital imaging. Other companies started experimenting. research departments began exploring electronic sensors. Universities studied solid-state imaging. The seed of rebellion had been planted. And once planted, it couldn't be stopped. Most companies gave up on digital after Mavica. Sony didn't. They doubled down. Throughout the 1990s, while the rest of the world perfected film cameras, Sony kept pushing into uncharted territory. They launched the digital Mavica line, cameras that use 3.5-inch floppy disks to store JPEG images. Yes, floppy disks, the same ones you use for your computer files. It sounds absurd now, but at the time it was genius. You could eject the disk, slide it into your PC, and instantly access your photos. It was clunky, it was slow, but it was also brilliantly practical. Imagine being a photojournalist in 1997. You're covering a news event. With a film camera, you'd need to finish your roll, rush to a dark room, develop the negatives, scan them, then transmit them digitally. Hours of work. With a digital Mavica, you could shoot, eject the floppy, plug it into a laptop, and email photos within minutes. For working professionals who needed speed, it was transformative. Sony kept iterating. They improved the sensors, increased the resolution, refined the color science, and then came the breakthrough. CyberShot, late 1990s. Sony introduced the CyberShot DSC series, compact, metal bodies, Carl Zeiss lenses, vivid color science. These weren't just cameras, they were status symbols. Everyone had a CyberShot. Travel photographers, college students, families documenting birthdays and vacations. The CyberShot became synonymous with digital photography in the consumer space. What made CyberShot special wasn't just the technology, it was the design philosophy. Sony understood that cameras needed to be beautiful, intuitive, aspirational. They treated cameras like consumer electronics, not industrial tools. Sleek lines, intuitive menus, colors that popped off the screen. Other companies made digital cameras. Sony made digital cameras you wanted to carry. The advertising was everywhere. Magazine spreads showing families on beaches, friends at parties, travelers exploring cities, all holding CyberShots. The message was clear. Digital photography wasn't the future. It was now, and Sony was leading it. Sony didn't stop there. They merged camera technology with mobile phones, creating the Sony Ericsson CyberShot phone series. Suddenly, your phone wasn't just for calls. It was a legitimate camera. The K750i, the K850i, phones with xenon flashes and autofocus lenses. Years before the iPhone revolutionized mobile photography, Sony was already experimenting with the convergence of imaging and communication. They saw what was coming. By the early 2000s, Sony had built an empire around compact digital cameras. The CyberShot line dominated, but they were restless. They kept innovating. They watched the DSLR market grow and wondered, what if we could deliver DSLR quality in a compact body? And in 2012, they released something that changed everything, the RX100. The RX100 was a pocket-sized camera with a 1-inch sensor, significantly larger than typical compacts. It delivered image quality that rivaled entry-level DSLRs. It had a fast Carl Zeiss lens, 20 megapixels, and manual controls that gave photographers real creative freedom. Videographers loved it. Travel photographers loved it. It became the camera you always carried, the one that never disappointed. Sony had compressed DSLR power into something that fit in your jacket pocket. The RX100 series became legendary. Each generation brought improvements, better autofocus, faster processors, more advanced video features. By the time the RX100 Mark VII arrived, it had become the ultimate compact camera, a tool professionals used alongside their full-frame systems. But Sony's ambitions were bigger. They weren't satisfied dominating the compact market. They wanted to challenge the giants. They wanted to rewrite the rules of professional photography. And in 2013, they did exactly that. If you're still with me on this journey through camera history, drop a comment below with your favorite Sony camera memory. Because what happens next changes the industry forever. 2013, October 16. Two cameras shake the industry. Sony A7 and A7R. Small bodies, full-frame sensors, no mirror. Everyone laughed until they saw the results. Let's set the scene. At this moment in history, professional photography meant one thing: DSLRs. Canon 5D Mark III, Nikon D800. These were the kings. Big, heavy, proven. The mirror mechanism inside these cameras was considered essential. It let you see exactly what the lens saw, in real time, through an optical viewfinder. Mirrorless cameras existed, but they were small sensor toys. Micro Four Thirds, a PSC at best. Serious photographers didn't take them seriously. The logic seemed unshakable. Full-frame sensors were large, expensive, power-hungry. They needed robust bodies to support them, and professionals wanted optical viewfinders, the direct, lag-free connection between eye and lens. Electronic viewfinders were dismissed as inferior. Too much latency. Not enough resolution. They felt artificial, disconnected. Sony looked at this landscape and made a bet. What if you didn't need the mirror? What if an electronic viewfinder could be just as good or better than optical? What if you could build a full-frame camera in a body half the size of a DSLR? The A7 was their answer. Full-frame sensor, mirrorless design, compact body. It was radical, it was risky, and the photography world was skeptical. Battery life concerns, limited lens selection, questions about autofocus performance. Professional photographers had spent decades trusting mirrors and optical viewfinders. Why would they switch now? The doubts were loud. Forum posts declared mirrorless would never replace DSLRs. Reviewers questioned Sony's commitment. Canon and Nikon loyalists dismissed it as a gimmick. The camera industry had seen bold experiments fail before. Was this just another one? But then they tested it. The image quality was extraordinary. The electronic viewfinder was sharp, responsive, accurate. The compact size meant you could shoot all day without shoulder strain. And Sony introduced something brilliant: lens adapters. You could mount Canon lenses, Nikon lenses, vintage glass, anything, onto the A7. Suddenly, the lens ecosystem wasn't a problem. It was an advantage. Photographers who switched reported something unexpected. They didn't miss the mirror. In fact, the electronic viewfinder offered advantages optical viewfinders couldn't match. Real-time exposure preview, focus peaking, zebras for video. You could see exactly what your image would look like before you press the shutter. No guessing, no chimping, just certainty. Sony released two variants, the A7, balanced for general use, and the A7R, optimized for resolution with 36 megapixels. Landscape photographers immediately gravitated toward the A7R. The detail was breathtaking, and then came the A7S, a low-light beast designed for video and sensitivity. Filmmakers fell in love. Suddenly, one system could do everything. The industry was forced to respond. Canon scrambled. Nikon hesitated, but Sony kept iterating. A7 Mark II introduced IBIS, in-body image stabilization. 5-axis stabilization that worked with any lens you attached. A 7R Mark III brought blazing speed and improved autofocus. 10 frames per second. Eye autofocus that locked onto subjects with eerie precision. A 7S Mark III became the gold standard for hybrid shooters who needed both photo and video excellence in one tool. Sony wasn't just competing anymore. They were leading. They had proven that mirrorless wasn't a compromise. It was the future. Most brands slow down after success. Sony sped up. Once Sony established the A7 line, they didn't rest. They evolved it relentlessly. Stacked sensors, bi-ons processors, eye autofocus, animal autofocus, real-time tracking. Each generation brought improvements that seemed impossible just a year earlier. But here's the part most people don't realize. Sony wasn't just building cameras. They were building the brains of the entire imaging industry. Sony is one of the world's largest sensor manufacturers. Apple's iPhone cameras? Sony sensors. Nikon's high-end DSLRs? Sony sensors. Even some Canon models relied on Sony sensor technology for research and development. The company that was laughed at in 1981 was now supplying the core technology to its competitors. The irony was beautiful. This vertical integration gave Sony an enormous advantage. They could design sensors optimized specifically for their cameras. They controlled the entire imaging pipeline, from sensor to processor to color science. And they used that control to push boundaries no one else could reach. Think about what that means practically. When Sony wanted to improve autofocus, they didn't just tweak algorithms. They redesigned sensor architecture. On-chip phase detection, more focus points, faster readout speeds. They could innovate at a level competitors couldn't match because they controlled the hardware at the most fundamental level. By the late 2010s, Sony dominated the mirrorless market, not just in sales, but in innovation. Wedding photographers chose Sony for reliability and challenging lighting. Wildlife photographers chose Sony for autofocus that tracked birds in flight. Videographers chose Sony for features like 10-bit 422 recording and S-Log profiles. The Alpha system became the backbone of the hybrid creator revolution. YouTubers, filmmakers, photographers who needed one tool that did everything brilliantly. Sony's philosophy was clear: compact, connected, continuous evolution. They refused to be complacent. Every product cycle brought meaningful improvements, and the industry had no choice but to follow. Canon eventually released the EOS R system. Nikon launched the Z series. Panasonic introduced the S line. Everyone went mirrorless. Sony had forced the entire industry to pivot, but Sony didn't stop innovating. The A9 series brought speed that rivaled flagship DSLRs. 20 frames per second, blackout-free shooting, silent shutters. Sports photographers who swore they'd never leave Canon started carrying A9s. The A7R Mark IV pushed resolution to 61 megapixels. The A7C brought full frame into an impossibly compact body. Each release reinforced the same message. Mirrorless isn't just viable, it's superior. For many of us, Sony cameras did more than take pictures. They captured childhood itself. Think back. If you grew up in the late 90s or early 2000s, you probably remember a cyber shot. Maybe it was the DSC-W30. Maybe it was the T-series with the sliding lens cover that felt impossibly futuristic. You remember the satisfying click when you turned it on, the blue LED that blinked when it was saving, the tiny LCD screen where you reviewed your shots, squinting in sunlight to see if you got the picture. Those cameras documented an entire generation. They were our first real digital cameras. They were how we learned photography before photography became social media. The grainy vacation photos, the birthday parties with red eye from the tiny flash, the awkward selfies before selfies had a name, when you held the camera at arm's length and hoped you were in frame. Those cyber shots taught us to think digitally, to experiment freely because storage was cheap, to delete bad shots without guilt, to share images on early social networks and email threads. They were the bridge between film and smartphone photography. And for many of us, they still sit in a drawer somewhere, waiting to be rediscovered. But Sony's cultural footprint goes beyond nostalgia. The A7 series helped democratize cinematic filmmaking. Suddenly, independent creators could afford a full-frame camera with professional video capabilities. You didn't need a $50,000 cinema camera to make something beautiful. You needed an A7S and a vision. Film schools started teaching on Sony Alphas. YouTubers built channels using them. Wedding videographers transitioned from bulky camcorders to sleek mirrorless bodies. The The barrier between amateur and professional blurred, not because the professionals got worse, but because the tools got accessible. Museums now display the original Mavica as a milestone in technological history, a symbol of the moment electronics began replacing chemistry. Collectors hunt for rare cybershot models on auction sites. Modern YouTubers hold A7 cameras in their thumbnails as badges of legitimacy. Sony didn't just build tools, they built icons. From floppy disks to full-frame mirrorless, Sony's cameras became woven into the fabric of how we remember. Technology that made memory universal. Sony's story isn't just about cameras, it's about a mindset. Disruption without fear. Today, Sony continues pushing a 2-eye autofocus that recognizes human poses, animal movements, even vehicle trajectories. Computational photography that blends multiple exposures in real time. The ZV series designed specifically for content creators with flip-out screens and product showcase modes. Global shutter sensors that eliminate rolling shutter artifacts forever. These aren't incremental updates. They're fundamental rethinks of what a camera can be. In the future, Sony's already working on it. More sophisticated AI subject detection that can predict motion before it happens. Deeper integration with mobile devices and cloud workflows, letting you back up shots wirelessly as you shoot. Partnerships with lens manufacturers to create optics that match the resolving power of next-generation sensors. Cameras that adjust settings automatically based on scene recognition. But here's the beautiful symmetry. The dream that started in 1981, a camera that didn't need film, has evolved into something even more profound. A camera that barely needs human intervention to focus. A camera that anticipates the shot before you take it. A camera that thinks alongside you, from magnetic discs to magnetic memories. Sony proved that you don't need to follow the industry. Sometimes you just need to believe in an idea everyone else dismisses. And if you're patient, if you're persistent, if you're willing to iterate and evolve, you can change the entire world. The Mavica was laughed at, the A7 was doubted, but Sony kept building, kept improving, kept believing. And now, 40 years later, their vision defines modern photography. From a filmless experiment in Tokyo to a mirrorless revolution that defines today. Sony didn't just build cameras, it changed the very idea of what capturing a moment means. If you enjoyed this story of innovation and nostalgia, make sure you're subscribed to Alt Buzz Archives. Hit that bell icon so you never miss an episode. Comment below with the Sony camera you grew up with, and tell us what brand story you want next. Because every innovation begins with someone brave enough to ask, what if? Thanks for watching. In the archives of technology, some names fade. Others become the foundation of everything that follows. Sony chose to be the foundation. Until next time, stay curious.